one of the ministries out in the Tyler area was facing a PR crisis. And since I had experience in public relations, maybe I could help them out. And would I be willing to talk to the head of the Honor Academy? His name was David Haas. And he explained their situation, that some former disgruntled interns at the Honor Academy had snuck onto the campus with a documentary camera person and interviewed a bunch of people, including, I'm pretty sure, Ron Luce. They lied about who they were and their intentions, and now this documentary is going to be coming out on MSNBC called Mind Over Mania, and it was going to expose Teen Mania as a cult. In that bubble I was in, and the headspace I was in, where we knew we were living in the end times and that Christians were going to be persecuted, my brain was primed to instantly dismiss what a few disgruntled former interns were saying. It felt like this elite training program. That was my first impression. Like, wow, I cannot believe this huge international ministry has young people running it. Well, there was high control. There was a lot of God told you, or God assigned you to this role, and you need to be obedient, and God demands our obedience. He was describing like this physically abusive as well as spiritually abusive situation. I was like, yeah, that's so over the top. It's hard to believe. I'm like, that's not true, right? And they were quiet and they just looked at me. And I was like, that was when I realized like they were covering alumni. I was telling the truth.
Mine is the only voice.
Wow. What have I been doing?
Lay down my autonomy.
After that, it got very dark very quickly.
Hey, my name is Shalise Ansola, and this is Cults to Consciousness, where we discuss leaving high-demand religions or organizations and find healing and independence through awareness and true individual sovereignty. If you're only listening and you'd like to see our faces, both in studio today, go to our YouTube channel at Cults to Consciousness, where you can like, subscribe, join in on the conversation. It's the best way to support the channel, best way to support the guests. Your words of encouragement mean so much to them because they're bravely coming on and sharing their stories. So today's guest, we poached her from the upcoming documentary. Actually, if this is releasing, that means it is already out. Shiny Happy People 2 Prime documentary. You've probably seen the first one talking about the Duggars. This one is talking about Teen Mania. Neither of us have seen it yet because it releases tomorrow as of recording right now. So we are going to be talking about her involvement within Teen Mania and how she was essentially responsible for silencing the whistleblowers the first time, and now she is coming out and doing the exact opposite on this documentary. Thank you so much for joining us, Cindy.
You're welcome. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I think I'm going to be staying up till 3 a.m. or 2 a.m. Central Time to catch the documentary because it releases at midnight Pacific time. And so there's a 2-hour difference, and I don't think I can sleep. I'm really eager to watch it and just see how the story is told.
We love to do these follow-ups because, of course, things are left on the editing room floor when you only have so much time and so many participants. So today our goal is to talk about everything that you want to make sure you get off your chest. And I'm sure there's going to be things that the documentary did not cover. But first, how are you feeling about this coming out?
I'm excited. I am a little nervous because I want the story to be told well, and there's so much to tell, and I hope you're interviewing a number of those of us who are going to be in the documentary. Be sure that you interview Micah Ringo. She was the person who started the Recovering Alumni blog, and if it were not for her, we would not be sitting here talking about Teen Mania today.
Oh, wow.
I would have never been hired. She was the person that I was hired to directly kind of silence. She was the target of Teen Mania because she started the blog, she ran the blog, and the blog is where all these stories started coming out about abuses that happened at Teen Mania: physical abuse, emotional abuse, spiritual abuse, you can name it.
Yeah.
And she would be a really great person to talk to because I think she's going to be the focus of how did Teen Mania go from this amazing stadium event with all of the top Christian rock stars to nothing in just a short span of time.
Yeah. So for those who aren't familiar, who haven't seen the documentary or previous interviews, can you explain to everyone in layman's terms, what is Teen Mania?
Teen Mania was a Christian youth ministry that had its biggest ministry arm was called Acquire the Fire. And that's probably what most people are going to be familiar with. So for 9 months out of the year, it coincided with the school year, August to June, roughly, they would take a tour bus of 18, 19, 20-year-olds, and they would go from city to city and have these massive 3-day events. And they would invite the biggest names in Christian rock and pop music, Newsboys, DC Talk. They would have these huge influential speakers come out, and thousands of kids would show up every weekend for 3 days to be in this emotional, like, Jesus extravaganza. And they were being challenged to completely turn over their entire lives to Jesus, to stop sinning. And teenagers, they're into really heavy sins, like porn and masturbation, I guess. And so they were encouraged to like burn their CDs, confess their sins, and completely start living for Jesus. And by the way, while you're doing that, if you really want to show your obedience to Jesus, why don't you sign up for one of our mission trips through Global Expeditions? Or if you're a high school grad or you're about to graduate, come to the Honor Academy, where you can do a 1-year-long internship at the Teen Mania headquarters in Lindale, Texas. And they had a 400 or 500 acre campus out in the middle of nowhere near Lindale, Texas. Lindale is famous not just for Teen Mania, but for Miranda Lambert. So that's where she's from.
Oh, anyway. Man. I love her.
She's great. She's great.
Yeah.
She's probably the one good thing to come out of there. But basically, they were dedicating their lives for a year at the Honor Academy to Jesus. And the Honor Academy is what provoked and inspired Micah Ringo to launch the Recovering Alumni website.
So we had on Danny, who talked about her experience. She was there for quite a few years, actually.
Yes.
Banned and then came back, and so we got a little bit of an insight into what it was like from her perspective as a teen or a young adult. I mean, if we could call it that. So your experience, though, working there, so interesting. But I feel like before we get into that, we need a little bit of context to your upbringing and anything that would have led you to this moment, the fabric of your childhood.
Okay, and I think this gets into quite a bit of what the documentary is going to talk about, which is 1990s youth culture. Like, if you were an evangelical Christian in the 90s, you were making purity pledges, you were doing See with the Pole. Columbine had a massive impact on your life and your trajectory for the future. Teen Mania capitalized a lot on the Columbine tragedy, because one of the Columbine victims was going to go on a mission trip with Teen Mania. And so now they got to say, hey, this girl died claiming to be a Christian, and we need to be willing to lay down our lives for God, whatever that might look like. DC Talk released their version of the Fox's Book of Martyrs, which everybody who was in high school and evangelical in the late 90s, early 2000s read. We devoured this. And there was a lot of books about the end times, like what the apocalypse or Armageddon would be like. And so we were just raised on this diet of, you have to obey God in all aspects of your life. You can't have really your own desires and your own goals. You have to be willing to sacrifice all of that to what God is telling you to do. What is God telling you to do? Listen to your pastor. He'll tell you what God wants you to do. Or listen to your parents. They'll guide you into what God wants you to do. Or pray a lot, and whatever feeling comes up, as long as it's in alignment with the Bible, that's probably what God wants you to do. I know as a young adult, sacrificed a lot of things that would have made me happy, because I felt like I need to be obedient to God. And if something made me happy, that might not really be from God. And so I was convinced at age 16 that I was going to be a missionary. And I even went forward at church camp and like dedicated my life, and like, God's calling me to be a missionary. And then no mission trips proceeded from that. Like, I never went on a mission trip, short-term, long-term, ever. But I always had this in the back of my mind that I really wanted to work for Jesus. When I graduated high school, I needed to pick what I was going to have a career in. And I knew I was a good writer. So I thought, well, I could be a journalist. And so I went to college to study journalism. And I talked to my parents about how I felt conflicted. Like, I really felt God was calling me to be a missionary, but I'm going to school for journalism. They're like, that's a great mission field. We need Christian journalists. They were very affirming. Like,
what denomination were you from?
Southern Baptist.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just want to get that for context.
Yeah, no,
okay.
I appreciate that, because There's nuances. There's
Yeah.
some differences. But they were really proud of me and very supportive of me becoming a journalist, and anything that I did, as long as it had that subtext of I was going to go and be a light to the world and tell the truth about Jesus and write from that perspective. So I was a journalist for a few years and quickly got out. It does not pay well. And I was doing a lot of driving and I couldn't keep my car registration up to speed. It was kind of a mess. I really enjoyed that career, but I knew that I couldn't stay in that long term if I ever wanted to have a family, that's for sure. So an opportunity came up for me to join a political organization in Austin. And while it wasn't directly tied to Christianity or Christian values, like I wouldn't have been fighting against abortion or fighting against gay marriage, I still would be in that power center advocating for conservative values. And so that's an important context. I was very much raised Christian nationalist. I was raised listening to Rush Limbaugh on the radio every day. My dad even called into Rush Limbaugh once, and that was like, oh my God, I can't believe you got through. And he asked this question. I think he stumbled a little bit because I remember him getting off the phone and Rush was like answering, as a lot of radio call-ins, like, oh, so-and-so has this question. And then they kind of hang up after you ask your question and they just talk. And so my dad felt so disappointed that Rush Limbaugh didn't really understand what he was asking, didn't really answer his question or see like the insights my dad was trying to share. And I was like, oh, I'm so sad for you, Dad. And even when I was a journalist, driving miles and miles throughout East Texas to cover, I had a 3-county beat. I would listen to Christian radio. I would listen to AM talk radio. That was my go-to. So I was constantly getting the evangelical messages and the conservative messages and that Christian nationalist worldview piped into my brain. And that was really all I knew. So
It was more like an
that was
echo
reality
chamber
for me. Absolutely. And I really didn't know anybody outside of that echo chamber, not in any kind of meaningful way. So I never questioned the things they said until I became a mom. So if you want to get into that, I can. It was when I was working for Americans for Prosperity in Austin, and they are a Tea Party organization. I moved to Austin right at the start of the Tea Party. And so I was the grassroots and communications coordinator for their Texas branch. And I drove all over the state of Texas, talking to conservative groups about how to attend a public meeting. Like, how does a city council meeting work? Here's the different parts, and here's how to read the agenda, and here's where you can speak. It's length of time you have to speak, and here's how you should arrange your notes so you get your point across. I taught people how to do Freedom of Information Act requests. We did all kinds of trainings. I taught people how to set up a blog and how to put content on a blog. And
Were you blogging?
No, because I can teach people, but I like to write for fun.
Yeah.
Not for work. And so I did write for the organization's blog. If it was work related, I did it. So I wrote for the organization's blog a lot. And I also coached people on how to do it. We had a lot of great success. Like our membership went from 60,000 to 100,000 in the 3-year period I was there. It was also the Tea Party movement. We were holding rallies every year, and we held other rallies, and we held big events. We held something called the Right Online training. So we would get bloggers and podcasters from all over the U.S. who were conservative to come to Austin and network and, hold seminars for each other, et cetera. And we felt like we were at the cutting edge of the conservative new media movement. And this is going to be the future of the conservative movement. Unfortunately, while I was there, we advocate for a lot of laws that I either didn't care about or that were actually actively harmful. One of the first things that they had me advocating for was smoking ban, against smoking bans. So I remember driving to San Antonio and the city council was considering banning smoking in public places. And I came armed with a list of talking points that said, you should not ban smoking in public places. They can have ventilation. Secondhand smoke doesn't kill, despite what medicine says, blah, blah, blah. I never looked into it. I didn't care. I was being told to do that. I mean, I did care because at the back of my mind, I'm like, but can't it kill? I'm not sure. But this is what they're telling me, and they're the experts, so I'm going to go with the experts. Little did I know we were being funded by Philip Morris to go and fight these cigarette bans, these smoking bans in public. Like the lobbyist from Philip Morris would come to our office and take us all out for a steak dinner. And he took my husband and I out to the Alamo for their 125-year anniversary, something like that. There was an anniversary of the Alamo, and my husband and I went one day with him because he's a big history buff. And we watched the reenactment and stuff and got a meal. And, it was interesting. It was interesting. He's a really friendly guy, grandpa. Anyway. So I did that kind of work, and then I got pregnant with my eldest. I was still traveling. I think the year that I was pregnant, I traveled over 4,000 miles around the state of Texas, talking to groups and giving speeches. So there was one time I drove out to East Texas, which for a 4 or 5 hour drive, and I was too pregnant to make the drive out and back after speaking. It was an evening speaking engagement. You could actually find that speech online on YouTube. It's like 4 or 5 parts. And I'm wearing these morning sickness like wristbands because I had nausea throughout that pregnancy, and it had this little pressure point. So as I'm talking, you can see these wristbands on the video. I gave that to the documentaries. I don't know if it's in there. Anyway, that night I was so tired. One of the couples who were at the event offered to let me sleep in their camper van outside of their house so I wouldn't have to drive back. And I was like, really? So I'm pregnant. I'm like 8 months pregnant. I don't know. I'm very pregnant, sleeping in a camper van at some stranger's house. Because I had just a really supportive boss, and she understood what it was like to be a pregnant mother, and she was so kind. I don't know if you can tell I'm being sarcastic. It was miserable. I had a amniocentesis that I had to do because it was a high-risk pregnancy, and she was stunned that I needed to take the rest of the day off. She's like, I had an amnio when I was pregnant, and I just walked back to work. Why can't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, she was a peach. I worked for her for 3 years. After I had my daughter, and I worked there for roughly another year, I just couldn't take it anymore. And former colleague of mine at the newspaper, who was the religion editor, said that one of the ministries out in the Tyler area, which is in East Texas, was facing a PR crisis. And since I had experience in public relations, maybe I could help them out. And would I be willing to talk to the head of the Honor Academy? His name was David Haas. And so Dave called me, and he explained their situation, that some former disgruntled interns at the Honor Academy had snuck onto the campus with a documenting camera person and interviewed a bunch of people, including, I'm pretty sure, Ron Luce.
Mm-hmm.
They lied about who they were and their intentions, and now this documentary is going to be coming out on MSNBC called Mind Over Mania, and it was going to expose Teen Mania as a cult. And in that bubble I was in, and the headspace I was in, where we knew we were living in the end times and that Christians were going to be persecuted, my brain was primed to instantly dismiss what a few disgruntled former interns were saying, and to know that a place like MSNBC is going to be biased against Christians because they're liberal, so therefore evil. And they weren't going to tell the real story about Teen Mania. So without knowing really much about Teen Mania at all, without having experienced the internship for myself, and without even having talked to interns, I'd already come to these conclusions that these whistleblowers were wrong and they had ill intent. And so, of course, I agreed to give them some advice. And my advice was basically get all of your former alumni and donors and anybody associated with this organization and have them go to every review site like Amazon, Yelp, wherever, and leave positive reviews. And if they have a blog or website, to write an article that links back to Teen Mania, talking positively about their experience with the ministry. And they did. And it was great. And we were over, I don't know if it was instantly, but pretty quickly able to move the Recovering Alumni blog to page 2 of Google search at that time, which was a big deal. It still is a big deal. So that blog had done a lot of damage to the ministry in its years of existence. I think they launched in 2007 or 2009, and I can't exactly remember, but slowly internship numbers were dropping and they were losing money. And the internship operated in this way, and I think this is an important detail. There were a handful of full-time adult staff members. Most of the ministry was run by 18, 19, and 20-year-old young adults. I call them kids. They're right out of high school. They don't have any life experience. And they have signed up to be at the Honor Academy for at least a year. You could come back for a second year in a leadership role, and then some stayed for a third year in this like ultra leadership training program role. And really, it was such a creative way, potentially illegal way for Teen Mania to have this operational staff without having to pay them any kind of salary
And
or
they
any
were
kind
paying
of income.
to be there.
They were paying $8,000
Thousands.
a year to be there. $10,000 if you went to the Center for Creative Media. And living conditions were not amazing. Giving money to these organizations, they never have to give you money back. So you raise $5,000 and you go, they're going to expect you to raise the other $3,000. And if you don't, they'll kick you out. And you're like, well, can I get my $5,000 back because I didn't finish the program? And they'll say no, because you donated that $5,000 to this 501c3 charity, and we don't have to give gifts back. Buyer beware. Lots of missions organizations do this. Lots of other ministries do this. And certainly Teen Mania did this. So these post-high school kids would come to the Honor Academy. There would be several hundred or even, 1,000 or so each August and January. And they would be screened, and they would be assigned a job. Ostensibly, God would pray over it. Or they would pray over it and ask God, where should this intern go? Where should that intern go? But it really wasn't. It was a lot of personality surveys and like observation. And then the ministries would be like, I want them with me. I want this person with me. And then apparently God wanted some people to be kitchen crew and maintenance staff and janitorial staff. And you didn't get to question that or say, I don't really like my assignment. A ton of kids got assigned to call centers, and the Acquire the Fire had a call center, Global Expeditions, Missions had a call center. And these young people would spend 40 hours a week calling youth groups and youth pastors, asking them to bring their youth group to Acquire the Fire or have their teenagers sign up for a Global Expeditions mission trip. We had interns, a lot of other functions, IT, there's a worship crew, there was a touring band, there was the Center for Creative Media, which did all of the videography. They were led by a guy, an Emmy Award-winning photojournalist named Doug Rittenhouse, who won an Emmy for his documentary on Aaliyah's life and death. So he knew what the hell he was doing. And it felt like this elite training program. That was my first impression. Wow, I cannot believe this huge international ministry has young people running it. That's crazy. That's amazing. Well, there was high control. There was a lot of God told you, or God assigned you to this role, and you need to be obedient. And God demands our obedience. And you'll be bringing God's disfavor upon you if you don't obey, or if you push back, or if you question. So tons of emotional control, tons of fear control.
Yeah. Spiritual manipulation.
A ton of it. And it's not obvious at first glance.
Yeah.
It seemed like a really happy place. Every time I would go so I'd work 3 weeks at home with my baby. And then 1 week I would go onto the campus and work in an office. I was a nursing mom at the time because my baby was little. And I told them I was going to need a place to pump during the day. Could they provide one? Well, they stuck me in the IT department, which doesn't have a lot of females.
Yeah.
In a back room. Within a couple of weeks, they had put another guy in the room in the office where I was at. I'm like, I think they totally forgot that I needed privacy for this. It was an interesting experience. My first impressions were really good, and I really did believe in my heart that the recovering alumni folks had left the faith altogether, that they were being deceived by Satan, that they were disgruntled. And I think my perspective and the way that the leadership at Teen Mania characterized them follows, it's like Lifton's criteria or something of abuse, where you basically can discredit the whistleblowers. I'm not going to remember the list, and I wish I could because I looked it up the other day. But there's some standard criteria that cults use to discredit whistleblowers, so that those on the inside will continue doing whatever they want you to do. And people on the outside who are favorable won't dig any deeper. And we employed all of those tactics.
Wow, it's crazy that you were in charge of silencing these people, and now this is kind of your redemption moment of undoing all of that and some.
Well, I actually was a whistleblower well ahead of this documentary.
Mm.
So it was during my time at Teen Mania that I discovered the truth of what was going on. And I was not silent about it.
Wait, let's talk about this. So you are full-time employed by them, new mom.
Yes.
And you are in it now, and you have the opportunity of being an adult in where these kids don't really
have
fully
no life
see everything.
Yeah.
So you have this different perspective, and you start to know. So what are the things you notice while you're there?
Well, there was questionable like conversations around how godly woman dresses, or discussions around romantic relationships and how people should behave or act, and that seemed overly controlling. Like, girls, you really should wear makeup because for your future husband, you want to honor him and you want to look your best. So we're going to practice that. You're going to do your hair and you're going to put on makeup. And I was like, wow, that's a little extreme. Like, he should love you with makeup or no makeup. And there was just a general things that rubbed me the wrong way, because I've been feminist a long time, even though I was evangelical. And I know that doesn't make a lot of sense, but it really rubbed me the wrong way. The way that men were given this priority over women, that women were really reinforced with that idea of subjection to your husband. They're being trained for this. And really, it seemed like so much of the teaching was for guys and girls on how to find the perfect mate and get married and have children and raise them for the Lord. And if you're able to, in the meantime, to really be a soldier for Christ, to go into the secular world, into media, into business, and be that light and that gospel voice wherever you go. And that was a real goal. Like, we're specifically training people to go into media, into business, into journalism, like I did, and be bold Christians and stand up for biblical values and create influence for the Christian perspective. So it was both of those things: get married, have babies, and wherever you go, be an influencer for Jesus and influence everybody to live this biblical way.
Mm-hmm. So how old were you at this point?
I joined when I was 27 and I left when I was 30.
Okay. So did you start to pay attention to these people that you were trying to silence initially? The blog post, did you start to read them? What happened?
Yeah, I read the blog post before I even joined. I had this really awkward interaction with recovering alumni right at first, because I had my Twitter feed and I was tweeting about the Honor Academy and how great it is. And like, Dave Haas gave this talk about waterfall braids. How funny is that? And they used that tweet and wrote a blog post about it. And they're like, look at this high control situation. You see, he's telling them that they have to groom themselves a certain way. And my take at that time was, well, yeah, it's a little absurd, but like, my God, it's not this over the top thing. It doesn't have to be this huge distressing thing. But again, I hadn't gone through the program. I hadn't been through all the training that they had gone through or endured and the pressure of it. And so, yes, it very much was this environment where you need to make yourself presentable for the opposite sex. Mm-hmm. Therefore, you're glorifying God. You know, I was at Teen Mania for 2 months when Dave Haas, the guy who hired me, quit suddenly. And that was like, what's going on? Why did he quit? And I didn't have like a way to reach out to him and ask. And people on staff began opening up to me about rumors about the way Ron Luce spent money. Like, hey, did you know he bought this like 57 Chevy for Acquire the Fire? And the people in the maintenance team, these interns that were paying to be there, were asked to restore it so that they could use it in these Acquire the Fire events. And then Ron just kept it.
Right.
Right. He also he was a board member for Oral Roberts University, and they granted full ride scholarships to Honor Academy students who wanted to go to college afterward. And he used those scholarships to pay for his daughters to go to school. There were no interns selected. His kids used those. And actually, Ron's daughter, Hannah Luce, she began working at the ministry, and I've been warned that she was kind of a black sheep, that she made decisions that were outside of proper Christian behavior. And Ron had brought her back to kind of keep a watchful eye on her. And she was working in the executive office. And I'd moved over a short period of time from the IT department to the executive office. And I began reporting to Ron when Dave left. And Hannah came in, and so I got to know her, and we really hit it off because we talked politics, and she had a different perspective, and I was so intrigued, and she was so intrigued by me. That was really nice. And we decided to get dinner one night at a local winery, and Teen Mania had rules about drinking. You couldn't drink within 25 miles.
Within 25 miles?
Nobody's staff, interns, nobody could drink within 25-mile radius of the campus. So I'm not sure how far outside of that 25-mile radius we were, but we drove out to a local winery and had dinner, and had a wonderful conversation for probably a couple of hours. And in this conversation, she excitedly told me about some friends of hers from Oral Roberts University who were coming to the Teen Mania campus to begin working as staff. And you can imagine she probably didn't have a lot of friends because she's the daughter of this famous evangelist who's always on tour, who he was networked in with George W. Bush. Like, he was on this committee for youth for George W. Bush. So Ron was like a megastar in the evangelical world, and she's his daughter. So when she went to college, she made some really great friends, and she was able to bring them with her. Unfortunately, the week that they were on campus, they were going to fly out to an Acquire the Fire event in Ohio, I believe, or Iowa. And 5 of them were on the plane, and it crashed in Kansas. And Hannah and one other person survived the crash, and they were able to make it out of the wreckage to a road and flag down a car. And they were taken to a hospital, and the young man who survived and helped Hannah get out of the plane, he died at the hospital, and Hannah survived. She was the sole survivor of a plane crash. I had to go on TV constantly to talk about the plane crash and give updates. And I got Ron on Good Morning America. This was a massive national story about this plane crash that had a survivor and this famous evangelist. And Ron definitely wanted to use that to
a faith promoting story?
Well, no, to further the Teen Mania brand, talk about Acquire the Fire, talk about Global Expeditions, talk about the Honor Academy. It was a brand new platform. And of course, he was legitimately very upset about his daughter going through her experience and how difficult it was. But he asked me if I could get the governor of Kansas to come and visit or make a phone call to Hannah in the hospital. And because I have a political background, I knew someone who worked with the Kansas governor at the time. I was like, hey, can someone in your office, or can you ask the governor to contact Hannah? She was in a plane crash. She's in a hospital there in Kansas. And they worked that out somehow. And then I wrote a blog post about it, which is so sketchy, so gross. It was terrible. After Hannah recovered, she wrote a book about her experience, and I read that in 24 hours. I just sat down and it was such a great book about growing up in Ron Luce's shadow, about her life, how she met her friends, the plane crash, and her perspective, her recovery. She was not kind to her dad at all. And he was really angry about that and didn't want to have her books at any of his events. He didn't want to promote it. He didn't want to talk about it. But toward the end of my time at Teen Mania, it became obvious that the ministry was running out of money. And so he saw the opportunity to make money off of his daughter's book. So he allowed her book to be sold at Acquire the Fire events. I was like, oh, you're such a skis. Ron, you're such a skis.
Right to camera.
Yes.
Is, from your perspective, do you feel like the bottom line after everything that you've seen is just a money grab?
Yeah.
That was the whole point.
Ron came from this abusive background as a child, and for better or for worse, he found Christianity and it changed his life. And he wanted to do something to help other teenagers. And perhaps in the very beginning, that was an honorable goal. But as he grew, it became about his approval, how he appeared to the public. When the ministry was running out of money, he would not ask donors for more because he was ashamed at like how the money situation had gone. He was also part of this belief system that if you had enough faith, God would provide whatever you need. So he really could write checks for hundreds of thousands of dollars that the ministry couldn't cover because God somehow was going to provide. But I think at the end of the day, this was an ego thing for Ron. I think it made him feel important. Probably anybody standing on a stage in the middle of Madison Square Garden with thousands of teenagers screaming and listening to your every word and then showing up at your business and ministry and working for you, that would make your ego feel so good. And that would be hard to give up, right? So I think, yeah, definitely it very quickly became about feeding Ron's ego, making money, him networking with people in power. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but Ron is trying to relaunch Acquire the Fire, rebranded as Surge. And over the past few months, he's been sending out donation requests to alumni and asking them to support his vision for this new type of youth rally called Surge that may be partially online, maybe partially in person. I'm not exactly sure of the details, but he's just trying to reinvent the very thing that he broke over 10 years ago.
Oh, this is going to be a rude awakening with this documentary.
God
the
dang.
second documentary.
I can tell you, there's other things about Ron. Toward the end, again, when the finances were clearly shaky, the staff were just openly talking about, are we going to be able to do this? Are we going to be able to, we can't replace the tires on the bus, for example. Now I'm not going to say that was an exact situation, but those were the kinds of conversations we were having, like, how are we going to pay for this? And there was a rumor that the staff wasn't going to get paid in the month of November. And then suddenly we were able to get paid miraculously. And I'll get to that in a minute. But there was so much stress that trickled down from Ron and the leadership team to the rest of the staff. And Ron would give weekly sermons to the staff. And he talked about having someone who's higher than you in the faith, like an older woman or man or a pastor that you can go to get your spiritual advice and wisdom. And so I talked to him in a hallway at some point. I'm like, Ron, I know you're going through a lot here with the money situation. Who are you going to? Who's your spiritual advisor? Because you are like spiritual advisor to everybody here. Who does a guy like you go to?
Fair question.
He said Robert Morris at Gateway Church.
So tell me about Robert Morris.
Within the past year, Robert Morris has been made to resign from the church because it came out that he sexually assaulted a 12-year-old girl for 3 years in the 1980s. And the board of directors supposedly knew about it and hushed it up. And now he's facing criminal charges in Oklahoma. He's no longer the pastor of the church, but Gateway Church was one of the most successful mega churches in the U.S. They fundraise millions upon millions of dollars. I believe he was a board member for Teen Mania while I was there. Ron said he was his spiritual advisor. He was the guy that Ron would go to if he, needed spiritual guidance. And then after Teen Mania closed, he ended up moving to Dallas and joining Gateway Church as a pastor of one of their branches. And his wife, Katie, was also on the leadership team at Gateway Church. And the man who was head of Acquire the Fire, he was the guy who was over that ministry, Kemtal Glasgow, also became a pastor at that church. And within weeks of Robert Morris resigning, he was forced to resign for sexual impropriety. And that's all they would say. They wouldn't say anything else. So I just think, birds of a feather flock together. Scammers go to other scammers, and together they scam. Ron has tried to relaunch some version of Teen Mania over this 10-year period. He had some kind of Acquire the Fire event in Indonesia that he fundraised for. And I know that Gateway Church was helping to fund that. Like, I looked at their 990s and saw where they had directed funds to Ron Luce's ministries. So Ron is very much tied into that church, for better, for worse. And I just think it's interesting that scandal follows this man. And now he's trying to relaunch Acquire the Fire, rebranded as Surge.
Yeah. When did Teen Mania close?
In 2014. Actually, Teen Mania closed in 2015. So in 2014, I was on campus. I was actually driving to campus on a Monday, and I got a phone call from Ron. He's like, are you here this week? And I said, yes. He's like, good, come up to the executive conference room. I've got an important announcement to make. And so I go up there, and all of the staff are there, the director of finance, all of the different ministry heads, everybody crowded in this conference room. And he said, well, I've got some exciting news. We are going to be giving this campus back to the bank. And then we're going to be relocating to Dallas. And this is going to be great because our ministry is going to be near the DFW airport and this hub for travel. And we're going to be working with Gateway Church and their ministries. So we're going to be leaner, we're going to be meaner, and we're going to be able to reach more teens. And he handed me this press release that was written by this notorious PR firm that has worked with a bunch of pastors caught with their hands in cookie jars of all sorts. And I'm reading this in real time as he's making the announcement. Now, I'm the director of communications. I had no idea who was about to make this announcement. I had no idea about the press release. And I was being asked to distribute it to Christian media, which I did because I'm a good girl and I did my job. But I felt really uneasy about some of this phrasing. Ron allowed us to ask some questions, and someone asked about that, give it back to the bank. Like, why are we saying that? He's like, we're legally required to say this. We can't eliminate this statement from the PR. Like, oh, that's interesting. And I look back at the director of finance. His name was Dan. And Dan's face is like bored, straight, blank. And he's not reacting at all. And he looks at me and I look at him and he's just like, I'm like, okay, this is odd. And so, there were some new staff members who just relocated their whole families to Tyler, Lindale, Texas to work for Teen Mania and bought homes, counting on having a job. And now, like, the ministry's shutting down in East Texas. So I went back to my office. My brain was abuzz. Like, I couldn't really piece this together, but I knew I had to get the press release out. Ron would be asking. So I distributed it. And that's when Dan came into my office and he's like, hey, Cindy, what did you think about that meeting this morning? I'm like, I don't know. Like, it just seemed off to me. And he goes, come with me. And so we went down to his office on the first floor. I was on the second floor in the executive suite where Ron was. And I went down to Dan's office on the first floor and sat across from him. And Dan starts showing me financial paperwork, letters from the bank that said they'd failed to pay on the mortgage for the campus. And it's been 3 months of non-payment, so they're going to foreclose. And there were all these invoices for thousands and thousands of dollars that Dan had denied, that Ron had X'd out Dan's name and written his own name, approving these expenditures that they didn't have money to spend. And then Dan gave me a copy of this audit that this very well-known auditing firm had put together for Teen Mania about a year before I joined. And the first page said that Teen Mania was effectively bankrupt, like, considering all their assets, their expenditures and debt were $4 million in the hole. So they were operating at a $4 million loss. And it was just getting worse. And then the audit gave them advice, like, here's what you can do to dig yourself out of this hole and become financially stable again. One of their piece of advice was to hire a communications director. I didn't know it was part of that strategy. They'd also advised against doing certain big events that Ron had envisioned. And Ron just went ahead and did them anyway, against the advice of these financial folks. it was pretty eye-opening. And it was basically, here's the truth of the financial situation. I learned shortly after that the reason Dave Haas had resigned from Teen Mania is because he took this audit to Ron and said, you either need to resign as president of the ministry or I'm going to leave. And Ron's like, goodbye. So Dave left. I was stunned. I went and got lunch with my friend who was the reporter at the paper who kind of connected me to this job in the first place. And I showed him. He's like, wow, this is remarkable. And he's like, do you mind if I make copies? Because he's a reporter at heart. And I think we probably made some copies of it. I don't know. Or he read through it at the very least. And I was like, I think I need to go public with this. And he's like, well, really pray about that. Make sure. I'm like, yeah, but he made me lie to the public. My name's attached to this lie. I can't handle liars and I'm not going to be a part of this. Also, back to the whole fundraising thing, there were thousands of kids all over the US actively fundraising to go to an Acquire the Fire event, to go to the Honor Academy. And if the ministry is this level of bankrupt and has been for years, they were going to break themselves to get this money to go to these events and not get that money back. And that is wrong. That was wrong.
Wait, how did you guys end up getting paid that month?
They didn't pay the mortgage.
Oh.
So the money that would have paid for the property, they used to pay the staff instead. So I'm glad you brought it back to that. There was one other thing, because I want to bring this back to recovering alumni. They were a huge part of the unraveling of Teen Mania, not just because of the blog and their persistence and the documentary, which was the reason I was even there to hear the truth about their finances. When I had meetings with the head of the Honor Academy, and we had this guy who was the head of men at the Honor Academy. We also had head of women because everything is men do this, women do this, everything's gender divided. This guy named Heath was head of the men, and there was another person who worked at the Honor Academy kind of in some kind of leadership role. And I were having a brainstorming meeting about how we can help elevate his profile so he could write blogs and I can help, distribute it through social media, whatever. I can also help him edit his blogs so they sound good. And they started talking about the Recovering Alumni blog. I'm like, hey, did you see the latest post? Yeah. And I was like, yeah, no, I saw it too. And this guy said he'd gone through a exorcism on campus. And he was describing this physically abusive as well as spiritually abusive situation. I was like, yeah, that's so over the top. It's hard to believe. I'm like, that's not true, right? And they were quiet and they just looked at me. And I was like, that was when I realized they Recovering Alumni was telling the truth. These stories were true. They were not made up by a bunch of bitter people who just had an agenda to stop the good work that Teen Mania was doing. So I realized at that point that I'd been a part of dismissing people who really had gone through trauma. But this was also around the time that all the financial stuff was coming up. And I also saw staff members being mistreated. So a good friend of mine, brilliant woman, high achiever, and she was on staff. She'd gone from intern to staff. She was in some kind of conversation with Kemtal Glasgow, the person I mentioned before at Acquire the Fire. And he threw a pencil at her really hard. And she came and told me, I'm like, what the fuck? So I confronted Kemtal about it. And he's like, well, she was insubordinate. I'm like, and I threw a pencil at him. I'm like, is that how you treat someone? Is that how you treat a coworker? And he was furious and he stormed out of there. And I felt pretty safe to do that because he wasn't my boss.
I love that you did that.
And then someone else who was at the Center for Creative Media said that one of the leaders there threw a cup or something through one of the TVs in a fit of rage. I'm like, guys, we don't abuse our coworkers, especially if they're paying to be there. So it was just kind of this shitstorm that was coming together. It peaked at this announcement. And then everything started falling apart because I took that information and I called Dave Haas. I'm like, hey, I just read all this. And then he, behind the scenes, told me a lot of things and told me people to talk to. To this day, he's never added his name to public statements against Ron or against Teen Mania. And in fact, I think he helps run a Facebook group called Thankful Alumni. So people who literally to get in this Facebook group, you have to pledge that you've never been a part of Recovering Alumni and you still abide by like the tenets of the Honor Academy and that you're thankful for your time there. So even in the midst of this financial scandal, I think a lot of the Honor Academy people just continue to disregard the abuse that they oversaw and even participated in. I haven't even talked about ESOAL, which was the focus of the 2011 documentary, and it's a big part of this documentary. It's the emotional stretching opportunity of a lifetime.
Oh, Danny mentioned a little bit about this. So yeah, from your perspective.
I knew about ESOAL before I ever joined Teen Mania, because that was the focus of the 2011 MSNBC documentary. And this documentary, Mind Over Mania, talked about like what are the 7, signs that you are part of a cult. And it featured the former members of the Honor Academy who were now part of Recovering Alumni. And they met with this cult expert who went through all the different signs that a place is a cult, and they talked through that. But interspersed with all this were images of ESOAL, which is, like I said, the emotional stretching opportunity of a lifetime. So obviously really positive phrasing
for basically a boot camp. For those who aren't familiar, right? It's like Navy SEAL training.
Navy SEAL training, exactly. So G.I. Jane, think like that. I don't know. That's probably too old for you. But it's so intense and it's degrading. It was, people were torn down personally, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. They were made to do embarrassing or horrible things like eating Beanie Weenies out of a diaper, or for their dinner. Like after spending all day standing at attention, getting hosed with a fire hose, having to do push-ups in sand, eating food and then rolling down a hill until they threw up, and then rolling through people's throw up.
Oh my gosh.
And that doesn't even account for injuries people sustained. And the emotional, like tearing down, you're nothing, you're worthless, that kind of stuff. And the essence behind that, because I talked today, I was like, wow, that was pretty rough. And it's like, yeah, well, we've changed a lot of things. So, I've had an awakening, and I realized that we were really rough in the early days, but a lot's changed. We're more careful. And he really minimized what the documentary showed, and that was good enough for me. And once I started working for Teen Mania, I talked to some staff members who had gone through the Honor Academy and done ESOAL, and they were like, it was one of the best things I ever did. I grew so much through that. I mean, they were young men who were saying this, and I feel like that kind of exercise would only really go over well for a young man who's in good
who has
physical
something
condition.
To prove also.
Yeah,
being a masculine guy.
Exactly. They're in good physical condition. There's a lot of a lot of people couldn't handle the physical aspects of it, let alone the mental degrading aspects of it. It was presented as something positive, and I really did believe that they changed it up enough so that it was safe. And it wasn't until later that I really understood that it was so unsafe. They never really had medical professionals there. I think at best they might have had someone who was a staff member and also a registered nurse who could help. Or I've heard stories where they didn't have any medical help and they had to take injured interns in their own vehicles to local hospitals to get treatment. It's straight up abuse. And there's no need for something like that.
Yeah.
In a Christian ministry, like, how does that prove anything?
Yeah. How does it help anybody? Well, it helps them because when you break down someone's character and their physical needs to a point of death or a point of starvation or whatever it is, you're basically molding them to be whatever you want them to be afterwards. You break them down so you can build them however you want and make them more compliant and make them more invested. Because just like the sunk cost fallacy, well, I've gone this far. I've done all of these things. I've sacrificed so much for this group. I'm not going to turn my back on it because that would mean all of that was a waste and for nothing.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And I like that you brought up the sunk cost fallacy, because I think that kept me in that headspace for longer than absolutely I should have been. And even after I left Teen Mania, I'll get into how I ended up leaving Teen Mania in a second. But even after I left Teen Mania, I really stayed in the evangelical bubble for a long time. And I went through several years of depression because I lost this connection to people that I really loved being around, a belief system that I still held on to, that I'd seen this massive, ugly side of, like watching the sausage get made. And I still had hope that not every place was like this and there's still good people out there. But after I left Teen Mania, I'd had my second child by then and paying for 2 children's daycare in the state of Texas. That's so expensive. It was out of reach for me and what I imagined that I could do for a living. So I ended up just stepping out of the workforce altogether. And I did that for 5 years. I had a third child. I had that child on Medicaid, and I was humiliated that, oh, I'm using a government handout. I had people tell me, why are you having a baby you can't afford? Ostensibly people who vote pro-life, like, why are you having a baby you can't afford? Well, you should have married someone who could provide better for you. But being on Medicaid showed me that it's really great health care. I got better treatment than my best friend who was pregnant at the same time. And she had teachers' health insurance. So you're very basic. And she was spending thousands of dollars from her own very small teacher's salary. And everything that I needed was covered. And extra testing was covered. There, like everything. And in that 5-year period, I had the time to just listen to a lot of different voices. I watched a lot of documentaries. One was on these coffee plantations in Central America and these right-wing folks who, didn't really believe that, like, child labor was actually even a thing or whatever, and or that immigrants coming to America had valid reasons to do so. They were very anti-immigrant. And then this documentary took the people to the coffee plantations, and they worked there side by side with other people, and they saw children working there and heard their stories about, well, I can't go to school even though I want to because I've got to, help my family out, and how that completely changed their perspective. And it was an Al Jazeera documentary, which, if you're right wing, anything other than Fox News is liberal. But then I'm watching this, I'm like, well, that's true. Like, I did know that people tend to get abused in coffee farms and they do use child labor. And here they're showing this, and it's a very well done, like, honest perspective, and they're trying to tell the truth, and they're trying to tell an important story that we need to hear. And then my cousin got me to watch the documentary Born Rich, which actually features Ivanka Trump, and it was done by the heir of Johnson & Johnson, and he's become a documentarian. He's like, I turned 18 and I inherited millions of dollars. I didn't earn it. I did nothing to get this, and here I am with all this money for the rest of my life. And the money just keeps growing. And then he interviewed his other wealthy friends, and we saw their attitudes and perspectives of just inheriting wealth. And then he went to, I want to say it was New Orleans or Houston, and he met this low-income family, and he spent the day with them, and they were having a barbecue. They were singing together. They were enjoying each other's company. And as he's leaving, he's driving back to his hotel, I guess, with the father of the family. He looks wistful. He looks like, I wish I could have this kind of joy in my life, and I can't, because you could have all the wealth in the world, but you don't have any kind of connection to people. But that documentary is eye-opening because I'm like, we think wealthy people deserve their wealth, that they earned this, but almost without fail, they got their wealth through inheritance or through mistreating their employees. Bottom line. So we should stop idolizing them. That was a big wake-up call. And then I also read or watched a lot of talks, and I think there were YouTube documentaries made about the book Dark Money, and that very much focused on the Koch brothers. I remember I worked for their organization for 3 years, and I just saw what kind of pieces of crap these people are to poor folks, like to even people who worked for them, and how they coordinate all of this effort to get this very particular pro-capitalist agenda passed, and how that hurts people. So I don't think I would have ever been exposed to any of this information had I stayed working in the conservative political world or in the Christian ministry world. I think I would have been too busy. I think I would have stayed in my echo chamber and never been exposed to these alternative points of view. But because I was no longer working and I had 3 young children and I had time on my hands while nursing or changing diapers, I got to really see a different perspective. And then in 2017, I started doing ride sharing to make money to go on a trip to Scotland for my husband and my 10-year anniversary. And I really, that like not only burst my bubble, but it tore the whole thing down. Like, of course, it was a year after Trump's election, and that was horrific to me. I hated Trump from the beginning. I voted for Marco Rubio in the Republican primary because I couldn't vote for a Democrat. But then I didn't vote in the presidential. And I think that was the last time I ever voted for a Republican because I was so sick of what they were doing, but they were becoming nothing that they represented lived up to the values that I was taught growing up of love your neighbor as yourself, red and yellow, black and white. They are precious in His sight. None of it matched up. And I also, I'm a big knitter, and I had a friend who worked in northern Iraq for a mission, and the battle for Mosul was happening. This is a little bit of a sidetrack, but I wanted to knit hats to send up to them just because like these people were fleeing their homes and had nothing. And I asked a bunch of my Christian friends who knit, hey, would you make some hats and we're going to send them to Iraq? And they're like, no, because Trump had come out with his immigrant bans for Muslim countries. And I was like, yeah, but this is going to them. And this is just a nice thing to do. And they're like, please don't ask me again. Oh, you become a social justice warrior. I'm like, I was boggled. Like, no, this is literally what Jesus teaches us to do. Like, what?
I'm
What the
interested
heck?
how doing rideshare opened your eyes.
Yeah. So I listened to this podcast called The Liturgist that Hannah Luce had recommended to me. So she and I had gotten back in contact, and we were talking about the Teen Mania days. And there was a guy who had a podcast, and he used to tour with Acquire the Fire. And he was one of the founding members of The Liturgists. And she said he talks about Teen Mania sometimes on his podcast. I'm like, oh, I'm going to listen to this. And he had this partner who was big into science. They'd both like come to the edge of atheism. Like they'd stop believing in God and they're like, maybe we're atheists. And then both of them for different reasons had come back to Christianity, but it was this wildly different version of Christianity that was accepting of LGBTQ people, that elevated women and people of color and like deferred to them as authorities in their spaces and practiced mindfulness. And, the prayer lives were so radically different from like, I'm going to talk at Jesus and ask for things, like it was more meditative. And that really spoke to me. That was just, so while I'm doing rideshare, I'm listening to this podcast and that provoked conversations. And I met so many people who had some kind of exposure to church, meaningful exposure, like they went to church for their childhood and now they don't anymore. Or there was a gay couple who still went to an evangelical church that preached against homosexuality, but they loved church so much and they love God and they just really want to be there in that environment worshiping God, even if they weren't accepted. Obviously, I'm someone who likes to talk, so I jumped right into that conversation and asked, how's your family about this? And they started crying and they said, we're not invited home at Thanksgiving because our brothers and sisters are worried we're going to turn our nieces and nephews gay. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
These people, they're not putting on a show for me so that I'll be convinced that being gay is, a legitimate lifestyle. These are real people with their real feelings and real emotions and thoughts and faith, just being real with some stranger in a car. And there was another woman who worked for Planned Parenthood as a counselor. So she would help counsel women who were planning to get abortions or post-abortion. She said so many of them are women who think they're going to go to hell because they're getting an abortion. And but they also have other children that they can hardly afford to take care of, or they were raped, or they became pregnant and had not really even been taught about sex education, right? And so it was like they're suddenly pregnant and they're not in any place to have a baby. And this woman had grown up Catholic. She had gone through an experience. I think her father died. And so she and her mother were in need of support at the Catholic Church. Their particular church did not offer support. They were kind of ostracized. And so they stopped going. And eventually she ended up at Planned Parenthood in this counseling role. I don't remember how, but what I do remember is her talking about the women who are just beside themselves, despondent, like, I can't believe I have to do this. It's not a choice I want to make, but I have to make it because what other choice do I have? And I'm like, holy crap, like the pro-life movement is off the rails. If they really wanted to stop abortion, they would provide a way for women to have children without worrying if they're going to eat, if they're going to have a place to sleep at night, if they're going to be tied to an abuser for 18 years. Like, we need to make it easy to have children. And even then, I knew it was none of my business whether someone did or didn't get an abortion, because like, we have to prioritize the woman. She's the one who's alive. She's the one with the conscience. She's the one who whose life is at risk if this pregnancy carries forward. So we have to defer to her and her doctors to know exactly what to do. So all of these things, I was having all these conversations, and that just really was bursting my bubble wide open. And I was listening to this podcast for hours every weekend, and that it all. I remember being in bed one night, and I would say, like, this was like the last nail in my evangelical coffin. I've been reading about gay marriage, and I'd heard from some Christian podcasters who were pro gay marriage, and how did they come around to it? And so I just remember praying, and I'm like, God, I think I'm okay with people being gay, but I'm really worried. Like, I don't want to do something that you're going to punish me for, or that's going to lead people to hell or whatever. And I just remember sitting still and just kind of listening. And I just had this overwhelming sense of, like, why do Christian people constantly put walls between me and other people? Like, there shouldn't be any wall between me and gay people. Like, they're just as able to access me, to be Christian, to love me and worship me and go to heaven as anybody else. So God doesn't have a problem with gay people. Why do I have a problem with gay people?
Yeah.
That's where my headspace was at the time. And that was wonderful. It felt like this huge weight off my shoulders. Like, I was no longer going out in the world seeing people as, are they saved? Are they not saved? Are they going to heaven? Are they going to hell? I was able just to see people as their full human selves, with no no judgment, no preconceived notions, no ideas about who they are and what they might need to hear. So in turn, I also got to be my full self without worrying of other people judging me. And are they going to think that I'm a good Christian or not? That in and of itself has been the most freeing thing. And I even wrote in my journal, like, I've been born again. Like, this is the peace that passes understanding that I've been told about my whole life and I haven't experienced until now. I know we're probably running out of time, but I do want to talk about how I exposed Teen Mania, because I had those documents in hand. I had a friend who worked as a reporter at World Magazine, and I called him up and told him, like, I've got a story for you. And I told him just kind of the rough picture of the audit, the move, the press release. We had even had, I'd set up an alumni conference call with Ron and whatever Honor Academy alumni wanted to attend. And they were going to ask questions of Ron. But I'd coordinated with some of the current and former staff members who knew some of Ron's activities and his financial dealings. And I like pulled them to answer questions or to ask questions, rather than just doing it randomly, because what I didn't want to happen was Ron just be able to gaslight people and say, oh, this is going to be great. I wanted him to have to answer direct questions with accountability in front of everybody and expose himself. And on that call, he agreed that what recovering alumni had said about the ministry was true and that he's sorry for that. And then some folks asked questions about financial dealings he'd done, and how he was personally benefiting from that. And apparently he was furious, and I was fired the next day. Surprise. And that's when I took all this stuff to my friend at World Magazine. And then he contacted all these other people who had been at Teen Mania, and they were willing to talk to him. And he published a story in April of 2014, and a bunch of Teen Mania's board members dropped out. They were like, we're not part of this anymore. And then by 2015, the whole ministry was shut down.
Wow. So they hired you to save them, not knowing that you would eventually be their eventual demise.
Yep. Because I don't like liars.
Yeah.
Especially now that I realize, like, I've woken up to so many lies that I was fed growing up. I think I'm even more sensitive to that now. You know?
Yeah. I think that's part of this. It's the main part of this, aside from being able to also take accountability for what you did and reverse that when new information was presented. But the fact that you were able to see new information and that transformation of yourself and growing and finding new perspective is something that's hard to do. And few people do it because it can sometimes cost your entire reality, your identity, your jobs. And so going from A to B, I think your experience can help show people that it is possible to change your mind.
Yes, it's better to change your mind.
To change your mind. So I think that's my big thing is when people ask me, what do I believe? Even when I tell them what I believe now, it's like, you know what, that may evolve and change over time as I'm presented with new information and or experiences, and that's okay. And growing up Mormon, it was like, this is what you believe and this is the right way. And if you believe anything else, then, it's
You're
over.
at risk of punishment or hell,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Either punishment now or eternal damnation or eternal punishment.
What a control method that is.
Yeah.
You could tell anybody anything, especially if you're starting with impressionable children. When you say you have to do this or hell, and I was taught about hell at a young age, that's going to frighten anybody into making the right choices.
Yeah.
Or give you such crippling anxiety of, well, did I accidentally make the wrong choice?
Yeah.
Was my heart really in the right place when I said or did? Whatever. I am very anti-hell teachings.
Well, it just creates this rigidity of thinking where not only are you not allowed to think outside the box, you're damned if you think outside the box. You're punished if you ask any questions that are contradicting. And so it makes you believe that being steadfast is not only the right way, it's the valiant way. It's the righteous way. And it's okay to question. It's okay to not be steadfast, to be like, you know what? This isn't feeling right, because I guarantee you people on here who have been steadfast or are watching this, at some point in your life, you have an off feeling, because not every good thing is good always.
Right.
There's always going to be a time where you're like, that didn't sit right with me, or whatever that pastor said that normally has amazing things. Even me, like when people listen to me all the time and I'm not a pastor, I'm not a professional, sometimes people disagree with me, and that's okay because I'm human too, and not everything I say is going to resonate with people. And so I think just having the understanding that there are going to be times where something feels off and it's okay to question that is such a good skill to have in life, because that's the only way you're going to learn and grow. That's the only way you're going to evolve as a human. And it's the only way that's going to allow you to truly connect with someone else who has a differing opinion, because it's not just about your immediate circle and your immediate family who all believe and think the same way, if that's how you live. It's about connecting to someone who has a completely different upbringing, completely different beliefs, and truly connecting with them on a human level, because you're able to say, you know what, I don't necessarily agree with you, but I can appreciate your opinion and I'm open to it. It's such a good skill to have. And I try to tell people all the time, just be flexible in your understanding of the world.
Right. Just be open to someone having a different view from you and leaving it at that. Not condemning them, just leaving it at that. Yeah. You don't have to agree with them in the moment. Mm-hmm. You might want to think about it, but if you don't want to think about it because you're scared to, because you've been told not to, at least just leave it at that. Let them be a human being. Yeah. And I think part of that, the risk of being constantly surrounded by the same messages and the people who believe the same things as you or very similar, is that you start to lose the humanity for the rest of the world. You look at them as the enemy. And I don't know if in Mormon culture they talk about the world, but in evangelical culture, we definitely talk about the world, which is the shorthand for anything not Christian the way we're Christian.
Yeah. And
therefore evil, misled, deluded. And there is a big risk in opening yourself up like that. But everyone I've talked to who's gone through this opening up like I have done, this like revolution of my beliefs, would never go back, no matter how never mind how hard it was, they would never go back because it's so much better and it's so much more freeing on the other side. I have such a greater capacity to love, to have compassion, to be patient, to not have to be right all the time.
Yeah.
You could list them out as love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control. That's easier for me now that I'm not in a high control faith that says do good or else, or do good according to what we label as good.
Yeah.
So I truly think I'm able to be more Christ-like outside of that high control environment than when I was inside of it. Everything came through a facade. Are they Christian? Are they not? Are we on the same team? Can I truly be open with them? Can I really be friends, or do I have to keep them at arm's length? And I have definitely experienced the arm's length thing as an adult who's post-evangelical, whose faith looks radically different than probably most people's just in general, but certainly from what I grew up with. And it hurts to be treated that way. I've had family members say they think I'm deceived by Satan, but my life's pretty good and I'm very happy and I have a good circle of friends and I have some of the deepest friendships I've ever had. And I don't feel like I have to be this soldier for Christ to make my life have meaning. I can have meaning in just being with my children and being good to my husband and being a true friend to my friends and to being compassionate to my neighbors, many of whom are immigrants, like just being helpful where I can in the sphere of influence I can.
Yeah.
And I think that, I honestly think that's what Jesus was calling people to do.
I think our differences are what make us unique and great and interesting and beautiful. And I think there is something to say about when you leave a really specific container, it is painful and you do have to crack open and you have to look in the mirror and look at your own thoughts and beliefs if you want to truly try and understand somebody else's with a critical eye. That's a different story. But what I was going to say is once you leave that circle and you're able to create friendships with other people, it's beautiful to create a friendship because you genuinely connect with a person, not because, oh, we're Christian or you go to the same church as me, so we'll be friends. You can really create deeply meaningful friendships because you're actively choosing it, not because it's a byproduct of something that you are already a part of. Not to say that you can't make friends where you go, because that's what happens. You go to church, you make friends, who you associate with. But there's a difference in choosing someone off the street who you really resonate with versus just an automatic friendship that may be a little surface level just because you feel like you should.
Yeah, I think of it like this. All the friendships I had while I was evangelical stemmed from the Bible study groups I was a part of or the mom groups I was a part of. Even with the people that I felt closest to, there was still a wall, because if you really let your guard down and let people see who you were behind closed doors, you would be judged or you would be shamed, or you might be like, oh, that's okay. I'm sorry. I'll help you through that behavior you have. That's not appropriate, whatever. All my mom friends cussed, but we certainly didn't cuss in Bible study groups, and we were, or even really just around each other. It was just like, oh, I sometimes say blah, 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 ha, ha, ha. There was always this falseness just under the surface. And when I left, very few of those people stayed friends with me afterward. And those who did stay friends didn't stay friends for long. I didn't put any effort into keeping those friendships either, because I projected out that they wouldn't want to be friends with someone who'd gone liberal. There was mutually just no effort made to stay in touch. But the friends I have today that I've met just through my natural walk of life, are such a diverse variety, and they're all very interesting, and they're all neurodivergent, which I just really connect with. We're all just weird in life, and we can connect over that. And in fact, one of my really close friends, I met at a PTO function at my kid's school, and I knew we were going to be friends instantly because she had Harry Potter tattoos, like a sleeve of Harry Potter. I was like, oh my God, let's talk. And her husband had Star Wars tattoos, and we're a big Star Wars family. Like, okay, we're all nerds and weird, so let's just be friends.
Yeah.
And it's worked out. So yeah.
Yeah. That's great. I love that. Well, it's certainly been a 180 shift for you. And I'm happy that you were part of this documentary and you were able to speak out and tell your side of it, the inner workings, which I think is really interesting from your perspective. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you wanted to make sure we'd said?
I would really hope that your viewers are, whether they're questioning or they have a lot of certainty about where their faith sits or their belief system sits, that they will really take that time to make space for people of different beliefs and be open to having relationships with them that are genuine. Okay. I think that's a safe step to take because it does feel threatening. Go through a shift like I did. And it feels for someone who's still in the mix like you're risking damnation or punishment. But I think at the ground level, faith, Christianity, many other types of faith across the board ask us to view our humans in their humanness and to walk with our fellow humans through this life. Not see each other as enemies, but see each other as fellow humans doing our best.
Yeah.
If we can start there, I think we can make a lot of progress.
Yeah. That's a great Linda Listen moment. I didn't tell you what that was ahead of time because we set this up pretty quick and then we were like, come over. So we do a Linda Listen segment at the end. And it's basically what you just said, like a statement either to someone who's pissed you off, which is my personal favorite because it's sassy, or something to our viewers.
I think I already said something to Ron Luce.
So I feel like that would be a great Linda Listen unless you have something else in mind that you would want to say.
No, that is my overarching goal. I want people to go through this wonderful experience I've gone through. Even though it's hard, it is so worth it. It's so worth it.
Yeah.
It's just a better life on the other side.
Great. How can people find you? Do you want people to find you on Instagram or?
So crappy about social media, which is probably not great for this documentary, the PR team for the documentary, because I'm just inconsistent. My children are becoming teenagers and don't want me putting their entire lives out there anymore.
I get it.
But if someone wants to email me, they can email me at cindymillette@gmail.com and I'll do my best to respond. And we'll see where things go from there. I've been talking with Micah about potentially having a podcast where we discuss how to view each other not as enemies anymore, because we started that way and we are now friends. Wow. And what was that process like? We don't have podcasting experience, so right now we're just talking.
Yeah.
But we'll see where that goes, because I think that is our shared goal, is helping people see that they can look at this world differently and be better for it, right?
Yeah, I'd love to speak with Micah.
Yes, I'm going to give you her information.
Amazing. Well, this has been great. Thanks for driving over.
Yeah, I'm glad we're kind of local, not exactly neighbors, but kind of.
And what are you most looking forward to with this documentary coming out?
I'm really excited about all of the thousands of people who went to acquire the fire through the 90s and early 2000s. These are people who are currently in positions of influence, potentially. Like a lot of people getting elected to Congress now, a lot of people who work as professional staff, people in the media have some kind of connection to Teen Mania because they were teenagers in the 90s and early 2000s, and even up to 2015. But they will get the inside look at how that ministry really functioned and understand the manipulation behind Teen Mania's operation and their messaging. They're calling on teenagers to give their lives up in obedience to God. It wasn't a genuine call. There was a lot of ulterior motives behind that messaging that that we were susceptible to and that we believed, and it wasn't a good place. So,
yeah. All right.
I'm excited for that story to be told.
Well, I'm excited to binge watch it tomorrow when it comes out.
It comes out at midnight Pacific time, so I don't know that I'm going to be able to sleep, and I'll probably just stay up and just be a really bad mom the next day. Like, I'll be taking a nap. My kids are old enough. Like, my youngest is 9, so I'm like, feed yourselves. I'm going to sleep for a couple hours and I'll be out, and I'm going to sleep for a couple more hours and I'll be out. So,
yeah. All right. Well, any other final thoughts?
No. Okay. Thank you so much for letting me come and talk to you.
Of course.
You're very easy to talk to, and I really love talking to people who have made it out of a high control environment.
Yeah.
It's such a pleasure.
Yeah. It's definitely one of those, oh, I understand moments. Yes. Very similar things. And you were talking about how Mormonisms were demonized growing up. And I'm like, well, so were you.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
So funny.
So funny.
You're never in a cult. You can always say they're a cult, but we're not a cult.
That's right. How funny. How interesting.
That's how it goes. Well, guys, thank you so much for watching. Make sure to leave those words of encouragement down below. It means so much to us. Best way to support the podcast. Interacting with the post in any way, shape, or form. Liking, sharing, subscribing. We have so many interviews coming out from guests from the documentary Shiny Happy People too. So stay tuned for that. And if you want to support the podcast further, we have a Patreon at patreon.com/cults2consciousness. We have merch at cults2consciousness.com. Some Apostates Unite t-shirts. And I'm sorry for what I said when I was in a cult, which applies to you.
I need that shirt.
And yes, if you like this video, I'll link 2 more down here below. And until next time, follow your highest excitement, be conscious, and be well.